Hey everyone, it's good morning and happy Sunday. It is Sunday, the 17th of May, and we're going to continue with the Sermon on the Mount, the uh, little series. It helps anyway. So we move on to verse 4, I think it is, and that is, Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And of course, you know, the meaning may look obvious. We think about mourning, sadness at the loss of someone or something. And of course, that's the way I understood it. Here in Western Pennsylvania, and I as imagine everywhere, funerals are a big deal. And, um, you go to say goodbye to the person, to acknowledge their death, and to examine how your life will change when that happens. And you go also to comfort, if it's not your immediate family, you go to comfort the family. And but the scriptures can be like an onion with layers, and one of the layers, if we look at the social cultural aspect, is that the people of Palestine were an oppressed people, and they were oppressed by Rome. Not religiously. Rome was actually quite good with religion until later. Um, and For about 300 years, there were issues. But before, Rome, when they conquered people, they let them keep their religion. Rome didn't care. Um, uh, the Jews were unique because they refused to adapt, and they were being faithful. But so they were an oppressed people, and there is a way of mourning for what is happening. Like many people in our country now are mourning or feeling the pressure of change, and that's really what I want to talk about, because for me there's another layer, and that is when we grow as people, as spiritual people particularly, but even just as people, there comes a certain sense of loss when we realize that something is changing. Something is changing. And so, I grew up in a Christian family. I grew up thinking that, although I was still learning, that we understood. I'm laughing, forgive me, but I look back at me. Anyway, so, and then, you know, I remember when I was 19, I was at a meeting, big on campus meeting, and when there was an altar call, I went forward, and because I thought this is an expression of faith that is deeper, I thought, than mine, and I thought it would help. I did struggle. I will admit, I did struggle with my fellows, because immediately, of course, I got into fellowship, and there was this general expectation for me to believe that I wasn't a Christian before I went forward, but I was, and I really was. But I had to swallow my pride because you could argue all you want, but some people just don't listen, and they didn't believe me. Oh yeah, well, now you're okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And then, another layer, another event when I was to be ordained. I really struggled with that because I didn't see myself as ready or pure. And I've talked to a lot of ministers since, and a lot of them feel that way. A lot of us feel that way. And then a few years later, there was this crisis of faith, which, I'm sure I'll tell you about these all someday if you're interested. But this huge crisis of faith. And that crisis sent me into what I call my desert. Like, Jesus went for 40 days. Mine was more like 2.5 years. And and I'm laughing because I can, right? I'm laughing because I can. And so one of the things that I understand about this verse, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I understand mourning a loss of someone that you care about, someone you respect. I understand mourning this change that might be happening, that, this feeling of being oppressed and feeling for people that I love that are experiencing what they perceive as oppression. And of course, it brings to mind the way we're treating immigrants here, but that's a political argument, and we don't need to go there. At least you can go there on your own and probably should. But there's another kind of mourning, because every time we reach a certain spot, a certain place in our walk of faith, and we find out that in some way, who we were, what the way we perceived it has to change, that we're growing. And in fact, growing never ends. But this is meant, I'm 65. This has happened to me a number of times in my walk. And I suspect many people, this happens to just about everybody. We don't talk about it like that. And certainly not in the context of this verse from the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. We don't really think about mourning that way. But every time that I've grown, every time that I've had to change in some way, I had to accept that the way I wasn't bad. It just wasn't more. And there is always more. God is way bigger than any of us can imagine. And so I look back on those times. I look back at my youth. I look back at my time in college fellowship. I look back at what I went through before I accepted being ordained. And I look back at my crisis of faith and the growth that has happened since then. And when I came out of each one of those, I was essentially the same but different. And my understanding of God grew, expanded, not constricted. So I share this with you because each one of those events caused me some turmoil. And when I'm talking with someone who thinks they need to challenge me, because of their inability to understand me or accept me, they think they need to challenge me. And it's happened all my life. There's always someone more just imagine, we're all in different places. And so if you don't get me, um, um, and if I can get you, like if I can understand you, maybe that's where compassion comes in. But I'm not being arrogant. Don't get me wrong, because I have a lot to learn, and I'm 65. I'm going to continue to do this, and I'm going to give you a biblical verse so that you know that I'm not lying. you, I'm sure you know it. You probably have it memorized. All right. So, but each stage caused me to look back and understand that growth cost me something. When we graduate high school, there's always that speech. This is not the end, it's the beginning. Well, it's both. It's the end of being a high school kid and moving on to whatever we're moving on to. It is a beginning, but it is also an end. I mean, I don't know. Some people actually like cling to high school their whole lives and their glory days. Well, gosh, if life isn't getting any better. And you know what? Painful as those changes were, my life has gotten better. And maybe that's what the comfort is. Maybe I grow into some value, some understanding of how beautiful and how big God is. And it's amazing. All right. So we look back and we mourn it. I understand that I was wrong. Not wrong, wrong. We all were wrong, by the way. But incomplete. Let's use that word, not wrong, incomplete. My understanding was limited. And it is. It still is. I didn't expect you to take my word for it. You think you think for yourself and grow yourself. And if you're listening to anybody else, you're not thinking for yourself. It's always good to learn. It's always good to learn. But to not think for yourself is a problem. Because believe it or not, when you stand with God, it's just you and God. And you can't say, well, I did this because so and so told me to. All right. So I'd like to invite you. I'm going to read it actually because it's so beautiful. I just want to share with you, and you probably know these verses. It's 1 Corinthians 13, 11, and 12. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. This is the NIV, by the way. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. That's that change, that transition. But I think it's important to understand that it never ends. That process of growing never ends. Because then in verse 12, for now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And so, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are those, all the normal stuff that we automatically assume. Usually we just gloss over that verse. It's like, yeah, I feel sorry when people die. But it's not that, or at least not just that. It's as I grow, I can look back and be almost embarrassed by the way I acted as a child. I was a child. And that's the excuse. I mean, that I was a child and it was part of my growth. Don't hate your growth, but don't stop growing because the people around you aren't. You are you. You do you. And everything that you're going through, even right now, is part of that process. But if you close it off, sometimes I mention people sort of confront me and say, you know, how could you be the way you are? Because they don't understand. And I say to them something that I hope they'll understand, and I'm not being condescending. I just hope they get it and that this is all a process. They'll be telling me what's wrong with me. And I'm sure as a Christian, you know people who tell you what's wrong with you. It's common. I'm sorry. Okay, they tell you what's wrong with you. And they are justified. They think they're justified in doing it, but it's who they are, not who you are. And so when they come up to me and so they'll tell me what's wrong with me, I'll look at them and I'll just sort of smile. And believe me, I'm feeling love. It's not anger. It's not bitterness. It's not I'll show you. I maybe I could. Maybe I could quote a verse and line and verse, but it's not my job. If if they're asking me, I can talk about it. But if they're telling me, I don't have to defend myself. So I'll say this. The biggest difference between you and me, you think you're right. But I know we're both wrong in some way. We see as though in a mirror, just a reflection. Just because I see the reflection differently doesn't mean you need to fix me and I don't need to fix you. Your relationship with God, your relationship with Jesus, because these are the Sermon on the Mount, red letters. It was Paul in 1 Corinthians 13. But all right. So welcome and continue to grow. Avoid the judgment and avoid telling people what they need to do because it's not your job. It's the Holy Spirit's job if people are going to learn. And that's one of the comforts. I mean, might I say that the Holy Spirit teaches us all things? It's not anybody. It might be through somebody, but it's really just to move to the next step. So maybe let's not judge. Let's be compassionate. That second kind of mourning where we see each other in the light of, I don't know, people who are going through something, a growing process, and each is individual and no judgment. Happy Sunday. Have a great day. Go out and be nice to somebody, will you? Just be nice.